Hi everybody, it's Will from Gridiron Hub. I'm joined by Anthony Miller today. He's just going to talk to us about the XFL. Obviously, it's been in the news lately due to the acquisition by The Rock and a few other parties. But I know within the UK we don't know that much about XFL. So, Anthony, I suppose my first question for you is, can you just give us a brief overview of the history of the XFL?
Yeah, appreciate being on the show, first of all. Excited to talk to you about this. And
Thank you very much for taking the time.
yeah, absolutely. So the history of the XFL, it really started in the early 2000s with WWE headman Vince McMahon, him and Dick Ebersol, who worked at NBC at the time. He was their head of sports. They combined together to start the XFL. So that season went on in 2001. They had 8 teams. They got through a full season. And it was actually very interesting. That first week, they had a lot of success with viewers. I think their first game over had over 50 million viewers for that first game.
Wow.
What happened is they tried to incorporate a lot of wrestling style broadcasting into those XFL games, and it did not go well with fans that were just looking for football. So critically, like among like ESPN and them, were not big fans of the XFL. It got negative reviews, so it only lasted for one season, and then it essentially they had to cancel because Dick Ebersol and NBC wanted to get out of the deal because ratings by the end of the year were super low. They just weren't getting enough in attendance. So Vince McMahon had to pull the plug on it. So we fast forward to 2018, Vince McMahon announced in January 2018 that he was going to bring back the XFL. So from that point, his first big hire was Oliver Luck, who used to be an NFL quarterback back in the 80s. He's done a lot of work within sports in terms of running leagues like NFL Europe. He helped with the Houston Dynamo soccer team here in the Major League Soccer. So he's done a lot of work. And before then, he worked for the NCAA. So he was their commissioner of the XFL. So he kind of started it. They had 8 teams, different locations from the first time for some places, but they just played their season back from February to March of this year. And then, of course, the season was canceled because of COVID-19. Yeah. So then they kind of went into bankruptcy. And then now it's been purchased by The Rock, Danny Garcia, and Redbird Capital, and they're looking to start it up again.
Perfect. I'm interested when you say that they use the wrestling. I've got the wrestling kind of camera work and stuff like that. I've got visions of players coming out all of a sudden with music playing. What did they do? Like I said, it's obviously ages ago, but what were they doing wrong? Would you say?
So I'll say this: the cool thing that they did was with WWE, what they would have guys that they called it like a Bubba cam, because one of the cameramen was named Bubba, but he would hold up the camera and he would like get into the face of the wrestlers. And that was something that they introduced into the XFL that actually became very successful that we see today in the National Football League. So it was a different style of like broadcasting. They introduced the Sky Cam where you can see from above like you would for the video game, like through the Madden or NCAA games. And that they brought a lot of innovations, but part of the problem is that they would have different storylines. So there was like one incident where Vince McMahon accidentally pushed his cameraman into a door and he got knocked out. So he went into this dream where he's going into the cheerleaders' locker room and is supposed to be, very scandalous, very sexy and that. So they were really trying to sell sex. But they ended it very funny with Roger Dangerfield, which that part was funny, but a lot of people did not take exception to the XFL really using cheerleaders and selling sex to, try to get some publicity. So that was where a lot of people, like Bob Costas was very critical of the XFL and how they were trying to market their products. So that was part of it. Another part was they just didn't have the talent. I mean, the on-field product was just not very good. They really rushed into getting these players on the field. They essentially put these teams together within like a month or two, and they had really 3 weeks in Las Vegas to practice before the season started. And the lack of talent and the lack of preparation on the field really showed within those first few weeks, where a lot of the players struggled to get into the flow of games, and there's a lot of drops, a lot of turnovers. So by the time that they were, they got under their feet and they understood everything that was going on, they already lost their viewers. So and everyone knows, if you don't have a good product of the field within the first couple of weeks of a season, and everyone's going to drop off and you're just going to lose viewers.
Yeah, no. So did it feel different this time around before obviously COVID-19 hit? I mean, I think it was obviously planned for a lot longer. I know a lot of college players, certainly NCAA players I follow on Twitter, ended up there. Did it feel a lot more organised, a lot different this time going into kind of the start of this season this year?
Yeah, it was 100% different. One thing is Vince McMahon took 2 years to get this right, which was previous to the other XFL, it was less. They got it all together in less than a year. Like, they literally didn't have teams in stadium locations till maybe 4 or 5 months before the season started. They were a lot more organized this time, and Vince McMahon stayed out of the limelight. Like, he made the first announcement in January 2018 and never again came out in the public for the XFL. Oliver Luck became the commissioner. He became the face of the league and did all the announcements. So Vince McMahon wanted to stay out of it. He wanted to legitimize football within the XFL. So the way they approached it this time around was a lot better. They also got a lot more credibility, especially with the first head coach they hired, which was Bob Stoops. When you get a legendary college football coach like that into the frame, that's going to get people really interested. So they were able to just get better talent with head coaches, better talent with players. They took their time. They were able to enhance the rules to make it more attractive and safer for players. So in the end, just the overall building of this league, the foundation was 10 times better than it was back in 2001.
Yeah, no, I didn't know they'd hired Bob Stoops. I know somebody related to Bob Stoops in this, which is a small world. But in regards to what they did this year, are you under, do you think it would have been successful had COVID-19 not hit? Are you kind of firmly believe, it had been a success and would have got the fans and the kind of the credit it deserves?
Yeah, I think it would have been a lot better than the first time around. They were on their way to doing really good stuff. The one problem they probably would have ran into was in the middle of March. We have college basketball's March Madness. That's the NCAA tournament, and that usually takes in a lot of viewers. So I think the XFL might have struggled with viewers during that time. But outside of that, they were doing really well in attendance. They were getting at least 15 to 17,000 fans a game, which is not bad for a first-year league. Yeah. So they were doing well in attendance. Viewership-wise, they were hitting over 1 million pretty much every game. So they were doing pretty well with viewers. They were beating out NBA games and that. So they were doing well. And the most frustrating part was we had a team here, the St. Louis Battlehawks, who just a quick backstory. They had an NFL team up until about 2016, and then they moved to Los Angeles. The Los Angeles Rams. So that was a huge blow for St. Louis. So they had a professional team for the first time in 4 years, a professional football team for the first time in 4 years. So they were super excited. So they were hitting like 25 to 27,000 fans. And actually, it was going to be, I think, 2 weeks after the season canceled, they had a home game that was expected to hit about 45 to 50,000 fans, which would have blown away like any record they would have had in attendance. So they were on their way to having huge crowds, but unfortunately COVID came in and, canceled the season. But overall, I think the first season would have gone well, and I think it would have gone better than it was the first time around. So I think it was poised to do really good.
Yeah. Do you think that's probably one of the main reasons why The Rock and Danny Garcia have taken over the kind of the ownership of the XFL, because they obviously see, the success it had in such a short period, and hopefully they will move it on to the next level. There's not many people out there bigger than Vince McMahon, but then when you see then The Rock comes in, it kind of gives it that extra level up again, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's crazy. We were all speculating for the last few months, like, who's going to buy the XFL? Because we just had no idea. A lot of the speculation was it was going to be Disney or Fox or ESPN that helped broadcast it. So they thought, oh, well, maybe they'll go buy it. But when you get someone like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson to buy it, like, I hate to say it, he's a bigger name than Vince McMahon right now. Like, that's one of the biggest stars in the world. Like, no one could have imagined he would take over, but it makes total sense. The Rock was actually a former football player in college, played for the University of Miami. And, he tried to get into the professional leagues. He was with the Canadian Football League for 2 days, and then he got cut and was left with $7 in his wallet. And now he owns the XFL. Now he's a multi-millionaire. So it made sense for him to jump into it because he loves football. He's always wanted to get back into it. And then Danny Garcia, his ex-wife, who's now his business manager, it made a lot of sense for her to come in because she's actually a big XFL fan. She tweeted about it during the football season.
Wow.
So she knows quite a bit about football. She loves the XFL, knows a lot about it. So those two coming in and having that connection was huge. But then also a really underrated value was Redbird Capital coming into it because they actually work with the National Football League. So they have ties to football. So having all those three as the owners of the XFL actually turned out to be a perfect scenario for the league.
Yeah, no, definitely. So in regards to the rosters and the players that the teams had, was it a mixture of guys who'd come out of college and guys who'd kind of failed in the NFL? What was the kind of the makeup of the roster of the teams?
Yeah, so a lot of them were, they've had professional experience before in the NFL. A lot of them played maybe 2-3 seasons and just didn't make it. A lot of them were college football stars like Oklahoma's Landry Jones came into the XFL. Ohio State's Cardell Jones also joined the XFL. But then there was also an incident where we had Kenny Robinson. He was the safety for the St. Louis Battlehawks. He was actually in college in last year and was ruled academic. Well, he was ineligible to play in college football because his grades were not up. So he was academically ineligible to play for the 2019 season. So the XFL actually reached out to him and said, hey, why don't you come play for us? We'll pay you and you can get, we can help you put a, tape together for the 2020 NFL draft. So he ended up playing for the Battlehawks and got drafted in the 5th round to the Carolina Panthers in this year's NFL draft. Wow. So they were able to have a combination of, former NFL players, but also adding in the aspect that they brought in a college football player and was essentially able to help him get drafted into the NFL.
Yeah, no, that's an amazing story. I didn't know that. I know. I've seen obviously on the internet on Twitter, and you've tweeted out yourself a few times about the current XFL players who have got tryouts and been signed by NFL teams, and it's good that they've got that step there. I'm curious what your thoughts are. If you were a player coming out of college, you're kind of on the verge of being drafted, but you don't get drafted, would you say you'd choose the XFL over the CFL?
It's tough. It depends. So the benefit of playing with the Canadian Football League is you're going to get paid more. Typically, XFL players are getting $50,000 to $60,000 a year if you're not a starting quarterback. Starting quarterbacks in the XFL got paid about, I think it was over $150,000 at least per year. So if you want more money, I think the Canadian Football League probably makes more sense. But if you want to stay at home and still be in the U.S., then it's better to go with the XFL. Plus, you're going to get more eyes on you. The XFL just, at least last season, they had a better TV deal than the CFL did. So the XFL was on ESPN, they were on ABC, they were on Fox and Fox Sports 1. And just, those are bigger networks than like TSN, which they broadcast for in the Canadian Football League. So more eyes are going to be on ESPN and Fox. So if you want to have more eyes on you and you want to get more publicity, you probably get it more in the XFL than you would the CFL. So it's really tough because it's hard to pass up on the money for the Canadian Football League because you're going to get more. But if you just want to stay at home and have the opportunity to play and possibly, go to the NFL, NFL scouts are probably more likely to watch an XFL game than the CFL.
Yeah. So I'm curious. You mentioned they made the rules a little bit more player friendly. What would you say the main kind of changes and rules from the NFL was there?
So the biggest rule change they made that had a lot of positive reviews was the kickoff. So Typically with kickoffs, they would all line up at about the 35-yard line, and then the kickoff team would run down the field. The problem with that is you have a lot of collisions, and we've seen in the past 10, 20 years, we've seen maybe a handful of players get paralyzed because of injuries they suffered with kickoffs. What the XFL did was they lined them up at the kicking team's 30-yard line. So the teams were the players were, from the opposing team to the kickoff team were maybe 5 yards apart. So they couldn't move until the ball was kicked. And when that happened, then they can run off, but it wouldn't be at full speed. So they'd be colliding with each other within 5 yards. So that was something that I thought was a genius idea from the XFL, because one, you force the kickoff teams to return and add more importance to special teams, but also you're protecting the player's safety and making sure that they're not getting any more head injuries or running the risk of being paralyzed from a full-on collision.
Yeah, I remember doing the coaching course over here, and one of the things they said is the two most likely kind of positions to get paralysed playing football is defensive backs and special teams. So it's good to see that they made that change, which obviously benefited the players. So from what you're saying, are you a St. Louis fan then? Did you go to watch all the games you could, or?
So I covered the Dallas Renegades because I live just outside of Dallas. Right. So I got credentials to cover them for the season. So I went to Dallas had 3 home games before the season canceled. So I was able to go all 3 of those home games.
Was there a difference in atmosphere from the NFL? Was it very similar? I mean, to be honest, I've been to NCAA games and NFL games, and for me, there's definitely a different atmosphere at the NCAA games. Might be due to the fact there's students there's bands there, but I'm curious what the atmosphere around the XFL was.
Yeah, the atmosphere of the XFL is so different from the NFL, and I think it's because the XFL wanted to focus on its game days being more family friendly. So they would have opportunities where kids and stuff like that can get autographs from the football players before the game starts. Like they would have booths set up 2-3 hours prior where they can get autographs. They just had a lot of more events that were inclusive for families. The prices were cheaper. You can go to the concession stand and get beer and food at a less price than you would with the NFL. So the XFL really focused on it being a more family-friendly experience. So it felt a lot more inclusive than it would with an NFL game. So I found it to be very enjoyable. I thought they did their game days very well.
Yeah, well, hopefully one day, if the Rock kicks on, we might get an XFL game in the UK, which would be great to experience. How many teams were there in the XFL this year then?
There were 8 teams, so they divided up 4 in the East Division and 4 in the West Division.
Right. Okay. And is that a similar size roster to the NFL? Is it 52 players, or is it slightly more, slightly less?
I think they had about 45 to 50 players, but then they also had a 9th team that didn't play, but they were essentially a practice squad team. So they would have that team 9 just practice. That's all they did. And whenever players got hurt in the other 8 teams, they can call up somebody from that team 9 to replace them. And then, of course, the XFL would find another player who's a free agent and replace them in the team 9. So they use that team 9 as kind of a free agency pool, but get them to practice and be ready so that when they jumped on another team, they would already be in shape. All they have to do is just learn the playbook.
Well, that's a great idea. That is, it keeps that ever evolving door of the opportunity for people to be able to play football. So, so going forward with, I know, well, hopefully you know more than I don't know much. But has The Rock or Danny Garcia or anything like that come out with what the plans for the future, or is it still very hush hush? Anybody said anything?
Yeah, they're being very hush-hush right now. I think they're trying to take their time and try to figure out what are the next steps. So, in the past 2 weeks, we just haven't heard too much about what's going to happen. The speculation is they're still planning on trying to have a season, in February of 2021. That's always been the plan. During the bankruptcy, Jeffrey Pollack, who's the president and CEO of the XFL. He was one of the very few that stayed on the XFL staff, and him and his team were able to come up with a plan for a 12-week bubble, basically. So they would have all their teams in one city playing each other for 12 weeks and make it a television event. So that's something that I think they still want to do, but nothing's been really confirmed yet as to, if they're going to play it in 2021 or if they're going to wait till 2022.
Are you hoping they keep the same kind of location of the teams? Obviously, if they play it in one city, but the same kind of team names and stuff like that. Are you hoping that happens?
Yeah, I think for now, I think it'll be good. I think eventually they're going to have to move some of the teams. For example, the Los Angeles Wildcats, they didn't do particularly well with, with attendance-wise. They were averaging about 12 to 14,000. And, with Los Angeles, it's a very oversaturated sports city, and, it just didn't do as well. Another example is the New York Guardians. They played in an NFL stadium, and, they were able to get good attendance, 14 to 16,000, but unfortunately it didn't look great on television. The stadium looked very empty. So I think there's, for this year, I think they should keep everyone the same, just so that they don't, take too much time thinking about it. But I think for 2022, they're going to have to make some decisions on some of those teams. I think some of them will probably be moved. I don't know if team nicknames would change or anything like that, but I think cities and venues will definitely be considered for the next year or two, and, just making changes to those.
No, yeah, it's interesting. Just a couple more questions, and then I'll let you go. In regards to the teams, I need help picking a team. So, is there any help you can give me? I'm quite keen. You've got me interested. You've got me peaked now, and so I need a team to watch in the XFL.
Oh, that's tough. So, if I wasn't living in the Dallas area, I'd probably pick the St. Louis Battlehawks, because I think the team name is so original and their logo is so cool. Like, they have it set up that with the swords and the wings, it actually spells out STL. Nice. Like, if you flipped it upside down, it would say STL for St. Louis. So the way they were able to design their jerseys, the helmets in general, like, I think St. Louis Battlehawks knocked it out of the park. But on a very biased basis, I would say the Dallas Renegades. If you want to cheer for Bob Stoops and Landry Jones, those are just big name guys that ended up coming to Dallas. So they were just one of the more exciting teams heading into the season. So I'd probably say the St. Louis Battlehawks are probably the coolest if you wanted to do that. In terms of talent, I would have said the Houston Roughnecks, just because their offense was so exciting to watch last year. But unfortunately, they don't have their quarterback anymore, PJ Walker, who's now in the NFL. Oh. So who knows what's going to happen with Houston. And then Houston also lost their receiver last week, Cam Phillips, who got signed by an NFL team, to PJ Walker's NFL team now, the Carolina Panthers. So I don't know what's going to happen with Houston, but I would say for you, probably pick St. Louis Battlehawks would be cool.
Right, I'll hold you to that. So we'll be buying some St. Louis gear. I suppose final question. So obviously you've just mentioned a few players who have kind of gone into the NFL. Is there any you would say for us to watch out for? Any you say, do you know what, he's just going to be a star? Who would you say that is?
Well, I think the Houston Roughnecks receiver Cam Phillips just had a heck of a season last year. I mean, he led the league in catches, yards, and touchdowns. I mean, he had 9 touchdown catches in 5 games, which is absolutely insane. Yeah. So I would definitely say Cam Phillips has a chance to be a productive player on the Panthers. I don't think he's going to start, but I think if you put him in the slot or have him as like a number 3, number 4 receiver, I definitely think he can make an impact on that Panthers offense. Carolina's also got a backup quarterback in PJ Walker, who started for the Houston Roughnecks. I just think with PJ Walker, watching a player like that, he was the Patrick Mahomes of the XFL. Like, he was making week after week after week, he was making spectacular passes that I don't think many NFL quarterbacks would be able to make. Like, I think Walker is a really special quarterback who I think, given the chance, could really excel in the NFL. He's got a tough battle trying to face up against Teddy Bridgewater in training camp with the Carolina Panthers, so I don't think he's going to start. But if you give this guy an opportunity, he could really blow up into something really special in the NFL.
Right, well, no, we'll certainly look out for him. Obviously, the NFL starts on Thursday, and I think everybody's missed football for so long now.
Yes.
We're with the NCAA not properly starting. I know a few, conferences have started. I think it's just long overdue. But no, thank you very much for explaining it to us. If you could just tell everybody, I've got one more question for you, but I'll go to that one. It's not about the XFL. If you could just let everybody have know your Twitter name and where they can follow you, and some of the sites you've done writing for.
Yeah, so if you want to follow my work on Twitter, you can follow me at AntMill40. I write for multiple outlets, including XFL News Hub, Infinity Sports Network, the Brawl Network, Sports Gamers Online. So I write for multiple outlets. I also host 2 podcasts. You can follow them at Beyond Pigskin. That's my football podcast I have that's called Beyond the Pigskin. You can also follow my XFL podcast I have that's called the XFL Brawl podcast. That's at XFL_Brawl. So you can follow my work there. I always share my work on my personal one, so you can check out all my football with XFL and NFL articles there.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I think I've been following you since, certainly for a couple of months, and you're definitely one of the most active people on Twitter. And I know I think most of the kind of the XFL news in the NFL I've got from you. So you certainly do a good job of that. My final question: you just broached on it there a little bit. I've seen you do writing for kind of sports games. What's your thoughts on the new Madden? I know it's a hit and miss for some people.
Man, I hate talking about Madden because I have mixed feelings about it. So I really like the gameplay. I think the graphics are really good. Like I think they improve on that every year, but I'm not an ultimate team player. Like I don't play that mode. I don't really like it. The yard is really cool. It's really unique, and I thought that was a really interesting turn doing it because it feels a lot like NFL Street when I played when I was younger. So I love that part. Like I think the yard is really good. They could work on it a little bit, but I enjoy that mode overall. But for me, I am a franchise mode guy. I love franchise mode. That's why I play Madden. And to me, it was copy and paste from the last few years. And honestly, I haven't bought Madden. Like I just won't buy it. I won't give my money for a copy and paste deal. They're talking about making improvements and adding updates to it in the next few months. So if they make good enough updates to franchise mode, then I'll give them my money. But otherwise, I mean, franchise is just the same to me. So I'm all about the hashtag fix franchise mode because it's just gotten so frustrating for me. I don't want to drop $60 on a game that's basically the same from last year. So I'm hoping that Madden 22 is going to be the one that really takes a giant leap for franchise mode. But if I had to give it a rating, I'd probably say it's like a 5 out of 10. If you make some improvements to franchise mode, then you'll pique my interest to stay on. But otherwise, I just don't have an interest in buying the game again. I'll just play Madden 20.
Yeah, I think that's the problem with EA. They on all EA games, so certainly like FIFA over in the UK, they concentrate on Ultimate Team far too much. But obviously, that's where they make the money. So it's a shame that that's what the games have become. But no, thank you very much for spending time with us, going through it all. I think we've all learned a load on the XFL. No doubt. We'll get some people following you on Twitter, and if they've got any questions, they can follow you and ask away. St. Louis Battlehawks have now got a new fan, which is a good thing. So, but no, thank you very much for taking your time to speak to us. And you never know, once we know a bit more, we might be able to ask you a few more questions.
Absolutely. My DM is always open. So if anyone has any questions or just wants to chat about football in general, I'm always open to it. So I appreciate it.